Hello everybody, I'm really glad to be here and to discuss a very important topic for physical conditioning. This is a topic that I really care about because in my 20 years of career, from the first year I started to play with some kind of systems which are good for a pre-warm-up. Back then also we all felt that it's important, but now especially we know how important it is to do appropriate pre-preparation for training session, and with current knowledge and current evidence-based knowledge especially, we can be really smarter and create much more individualized training session or pre-warm-up session. I tried to maybe give something new today. That's why here you can see maybe something new term, and the term is performance concept. So not only performance, but performance concept as something that comes before good performance. Since of course the first goal of pre-warm-up is not only to have some chronic effects which are of course evident, but especially acute effects which will be beneficial for performance during the main part of the training session. In this class, in this lecture, we will go through different things, and I will try to walk you from characteristics of human body to basic stability and mobility concept, then to some parts of testing and steps of implementation, to the most concrete part of my lecture, and those are the exercises which are divided between mobility, stability, balance, and few combo exercises. And I believe this is probably the best solution to put all of the things that are possible to do in this part of training session in certain categories. And then each of you, each performance specialist or each physical conditioning coach is creating his own system, his own favorite exercises for solving different problems. So today we will open up some topics about specific problems, and we will try to find the solutions which you can use already today. I think this is very important. In the end, we will of course discuss how to run this pre-warm-up session, and I will show you some video clips of different examples. So in this first part, maybe it will sound a little bit strange to talk about what is human body made for and what human body needs, because realistically only last few generations we are doing serious sport. Everything before that we had to do many different things, and our body likes certain activities and our body is created for certain activities. Which are those activities? First of all, our body is created to resist gravity. What do we do lately? What does normal person do lately? They are not resisting gravity enough. We sit too much. Definitely. We are created to resist gravity, which means to carry our own body, to carry our own skeleton. This is very important, and we call this posture. Posture can be static and dynamic. In football, very important thing is how do we carry our own body, because if we don't carry our own body in proper way, there is no sense in using any additional weight. So weight training with somebody who is not able to carry his own body doesn't really make any sense. So the first goal is to create young athletes and older athletes which have good posture, not only static, but especially dynamic posture. This is our first part. After that, we can consider adding some weight in our training session and doing more strength. Of course, third point, which is extremely important in football, is to do all of these activities, to complete all of these demands for a long time and very often. When I say very often, I mean not only in the game very often, as we know as repeated sprintability concept, not only that, but also within the season, because we know how demanding one football season is, especially on the top level. Because of all of these reasons, And because of a logical thing that very important goal for football player is to create a lot of forces in short time and to transfer those forces usually from the pitch to sometimes sprint, sometimes jump, sometimes kick, it doesn't matter. The energy transfer has to be efficient. And that's why we have the body, which is able to transfer energy. That's one of the reasons. Another reason to have perfect alignment and to have, we can say, optimal stability and mobility in different parts of the body, which is very important for force production. And we all know, if we analyze a football game, we all know how demanding it is considering accelerations, decelerations, high intensity activities, and many other demanding activities. That's why it's very important to have good balanced body, the body which is like the hard ball, which you can throw to the ground and jumps really high. Soft ball is not jumping very high, and that's exactly the same thing with our body. Today, we will discuss the concept that can ensure you and your players to have optimal stability, mobility, and optimal body for further loading, which is a very important thing. Basic knowledge is that some muscles are prone to be tighter and some are prone to weakness, of course. This is just the basic idea, and this doesn't have to be something that's the only truth, of course. This slide and the red parts on this slide are here, maybe only to help you, because, for example, when I started 17 years ago, or 20 years ago, I started, as I said, playing with pre-warm-up. In the beginning, I didn't always go very deeply individually. At the beginning, I tried to do things that made sense with everybody. And if you look at this slide, you can see that practically all of my players need good core stability, definitely. All of my players need good gluteus maximus activation, gluteus medius activation. All of my players need good lower leg activation. All of my players need enough flexibility in hamstrings and psoas, for example. So these are some of the general ideas. But of course, today we discuss this topic a lot further and a lot deeper, and we go to specific individual things, and we are trying to give some kind of recipes what to do if we see certain problems. Top performance equals efficiency. This is definitely truth. Top players, top football players, are usually not at the same time the strongest, the fastest, and with the best endurance, but they are definitely most efficient and probably most skilled. But all of those basic abilities they have on optimal level. So maybe something to think about in the future. It's equally important to think about minimums as it is important to think about maximums. So minimum requirements of all motor and functional abilities is something that's very important to be able to create top level player. So think about your system, think about your philosophy, and create your own minimums, minimum requirements in stability, mobility, strength, speed, agility, power, endurance. Create your own minimums. And you can even go a little bit deeper and create minimums for certain age groups, which is also very important, and it will be topic of your further classes within this phenomenal concept of Football Science Institute. So definitely good range of motion and good functional stability is very important to avoid early fatigue, to have good motor control through the whole game, and to avoid compensations. Compensations is another interesting topic, because if you work at top level and you come to the new system, you have to be very careful, because top level players are usually they found the way to deal with their small deficits. They found the way to deal with their compensations. and it became functional deficit. So even though some of my top players, for example, in national team Croatia, some of my top players have certain deficits, but I have to be very careful in changing those deficits because they are used to them. So when you come to new environment, to the new system, to the new club or national team, maybe the best way to describe it is do it with evolution and not revolution. Because if you do it with revolution, at first you will maybe have some potentially problems with new injuries, but if you do it with evolution, small step at a time in changing current habits, small step at a time in changing programs, especially individualized programs. Of course, evidence-based knowledge agrees with these slides. And even though you can see over here that corrective program implementation, this is something very basic. Proper warm-up implementation, something very basic and very thing that makes sense. Mobility development, stability development. Many research on these topics were actually conducted with programs which were not individualized, but general programs. And general programs also provided excellent effects. So if we go further, deeper, it makes sense that individualized program will do even better and will create even better effects. But as I said, it has to be small step at a time, and it has to be very carefully planned and of course implemented. Not only injury prevention, but evidence on performance also shows that implementation of correct warm-up strategies and, as I said, basic body qualities is definitely beneficial for performance. This is one of the most important slides in this lecture. If you want to remember one slide, this is maybe one of them to remember, maybe number one. It's very important to know which body part needs what. You have only two options, stability or mobility. So if you go from the foot, foot needs stability. To be able to produce a lot of force, to be able to decelerate, it's very important for your foot to have stability. If you go up, it's logical that different parts of body need something else. So there is alternation between goals, stability, mobility, and so on. So ankle needs enough mobility. One of the potential problems, not only in football, but in many sports, is dorsiflexion. Many players lack a little bit of range of motion in dorsiflexion. In later slides, I will show few simple examples how to improve that. Of course, knee needs stability. In order for knee to be stable, of course, many muscles have to work in proper way, especially quadriceps, hamstrings, and gluteus medius, which is important muscle for knee stability. Sometimes it is undermined in general training, but pre-warm-up session is perfect time to activate gluteus medius in proper way, especially with the players who have potential risk for knee injury or previous knee injury history. Now we are coming to maybe the most important joint on the athlete's body, and that's the hip. The hip basically needs mobility, but of course all muscles around the hip need to have good activation and good strength in order to function as a whole, in order for body to function as a single unit, which is very important. So hip mobility, which consists of different things. In later slides we will show different exercises for hip mobility. Just in short, hamstrings need optimal flexibility, psoas needs optimal flexibility, adductors need optimal flexibility, and of course external and internal rotators of the hip also need optimal flexibility. Those are very important things. And if you analyze football activity, if you analyze passing, if you analyze anything that happens in the game, it makes sense that hip is probably the most important joint on the body of the football player. If we go up, the lumbar spine needs to be stable. And it's not built to have great mobility. Upward in thoracic spine we will have great mobility, but lumbar spine needs stability. And probably the most important idea in philosophy of core training is to do exercises which are resistance to external forces or gravity. More of those exercises, less of exercises which are creating of the movement. Later slides will show you typical examples of exercises which are optimal or adequate for resistance and for being able to maintain good body position with certain external forces. This is the most important philosophy of core training. A little bit later about that in about 7.5 minutes. Thoracic mobility is very important, and especially in terms of rotation and extension. Those are very important movements for thoracic spine, and it's also important for all of these things that we discussed, for body working as a unit, for body being in good symmetry and good balance, and of course to be able to perform on high level. Scapular stability is something that's also important. Today we see certain problems with young players, especially under 15 players, who have certain problems with posture. So for those players especially, it's very important to create individual protocols of pre-warm-up training session, and if they do them 3 times a week, practical experience shows that it's possible to gain significant effects with that kind of work. And of course, when something is important, it's also possible to do it every day, depending on the training week, depending on the periodization. These kind of sessions are something that can be implemented almost daily, depending of course on the goals, age, level of players, and many other things which we will discuss in a few minutes. Shoulder knees mobility, and this is maybe a little bit less important, but if we have certain player with certain postural problems, we should address also shoulder mobility. Steps for implementation of this kind of program, of this pre-warm-up program, or this performance concept. First, of course, training and injury history. I will talk about first 2 points together, because training and injury history together with training culture and current player habits is something that's very important. In my latest experience for World Cup 2018 with Croatian national team, this was very important part of my information gathering, because I didn't have time to do all of the tests which are possible to do, and that's good. In that case, for this World Cup, I chose totally individual approach. In previous sessions or previous championships, I was involved with the same team, Croatian national team, for preparations for Brazil World Cup, and back then we did all tests with all players. That was fortunate for me because I know all of these players for many years, and this year, 2018, I chose to be as individual as I can be, and I created, together with my team, a sports intelligence system which is based on gathering as much information as possible. About what? About, of course, training history, injury history, about current condition, about current player habits, about lifestyle habits. All of these things are very important. I wanted to communicate with their personal trainers. I wanted to communicate with their strength and conditioning coaches in the clubs. I wanted to communicate with a doctor from our national team. He communicated with other doctors from the clubs. So we tried to create certain sports intelligence system to gather as much information as possible, because national team environment is significantly different than club environment. In national team, you don't have a lot of time. You have 3 weeks of preparation, and then you have championship. So it's very important to be simple enough. It's very important to be selective and to do only things which are most important. And if you look at national team, maybe you can look at it like that hot air balloon, which has to be light enough. You have to throw away everything unnecessary in order for balloon to go up. So national team environment is very different than club environment. When I work in the club, I do it differently. In national team, I have to be very selective, and these are some of the things that I wanted to do before the 2018 World Cup. It showed as success, of course, not only because of that, but in this kind of competition, every small detail is very important. And communication and environment in which players are is extremely, extremely important. Of course, if I devote myself to every player individually, that creates better relationship, that creates better trust, and trust is very important if we want the program or project to be successful. Of course, number 3 is testing. In next slide, we will see certain types of testing, only if we talk about, of course, pre-warm-up, not general testing. After that, of course, comes individual implementation of the specific programs or protocols. And then during some kind of process, it's very important to have program corrections and certain progressions. So we start from one point, and then, of course, we have to do corrections, but also many, many progressions in order to gain certain effects. So typical types of testing for this kind of pre-performance is, again, questionnaire and interview. Not only interview with the athlete or player, but also many interviews with people around him. Some kind of functional movement screening, which can be whatever you want. You can take maybe FMS as something basic, but it's not enough. In my system, I like to use, for example, 13 tests. 13 tests which give me solid idea about certain deficits and solid idea about what I have to do with certain player. Of course, I always like to consult different people from other areas, such as physiotherapists, of course, medical doctors. It's very important to have good synergy of those people, to have enough information and to be smart about the solution, because solution is always combination of these areas. It's always combination of strength and conditioning, physiotherapy, of course, medical part is very important part. If you have abilities to objectively and subjectively measure movement mechanics or assess, that can give you some idea of maybe possible problems, for example, with valgus in landing or different things which can be in future something to be careful about considering injury prevention. And of course, if necessary, isokinetic testing and many other options to be more precise, especially if the injury history suggests that we have to be more precise about testing and evaluation. What do we assess? Basically, we assess deficits, potential deficits, some imbalances and asymmetries, and as consequence of that, some compensations. When we consider all of those and we put in all of the previous history and training history and habits, then we can decide what to do. So, in my opinion, it's not enough to have this deficits, imbalances, asymmetries, compensations, and then to decide. You always have to take in consideration individual needs and individual habits of the player. Always coming back to my previous experience. In one team, I have, for example, 5 players who have totally different approach to training program. Every one of those 5 approaches is good approach, and it's perfect for them. So different approaches, all of them good approaches, and all of them perfect for that individual which is applying them. So we have to take in consideration many things when we create these types of programs. When we talk about warm-up generally, here you can see some of the photos from summer of 2018, different environments, different rooms. Sometimes as a strength and conditioning coach you have to be creative, and here you can see sometimes conference room that's turned into gym, which is normal and it's possible. So it's not about equipment sometimes, it's about the idea, and it's about knowing what you want to do. If you know what you want to do, you can be creative in some situations which are like that need a lot of creativity, and you need to solve problems. So two types of warm-up implementation, of course. In this course you already heard, and you will hear many things about general warm-up, and today we talk about individual corrective programs. General warm-up, in my opinion, is important because it's teamwork, and you should give every player the small dose of everything important. What do I mean by that? I think that every player needs to have, as I said, small dose of core stability, small dose of dynamic stretching, small dose of hamstrings activation, small dose of balance, small dose of innervation. So team warm-up should be comprised of small doses of all of those important aspects for performance. General warm-up goals. And why do I show this? Because in pre-warm-up session it is possible to influence all of those, which is incredible. Mental readiness comes first, because maybe, or for sure, you have to be mentally ready and to have good mindset in order to start doing anything, and especially if it's something physical. And last two topics are of course connected to the first two and are consequences of the first two, because injury prevention and performance enhancement of course come from mental readiness and physical readiness. These are some of the phases of warm-up. My team and I discussed this a lot, and we came up with these 8 basic phases of warm-up. I show this only for one reason, because it makes sense in progression. If we talk about first capillarization, then myofascial release, mobilization, stretching, activation, stabilization, balance, and innervation. It sounds complicated, but it's not. It's actually very simple, and it's very logically step by step. What's important is that individually you can do all of these steps in pre-warm-up. Not all players should do everything, but all of these steps it's possible to do in pre-warm-up. Some players, for example, will do only myofascial release and a little bit of stretching, maybe some stabilization. Some will do something else, and after that, in our team warm-up, we will then give them, as I said, small dose of everything that's important. Another way of creating warm-up is simpler, a little bit simpler, but also consists of many different things. And here you see raise, activate and mobilize and potentiate. Can you do all of those also in a pre-warm-up session? Of course you can. Of course you can. Maybe there is question mark on potentiation. Why? Because it suggests a little bit more force. It suggests a little bit more strength or power. But maybe we can change paradigm a little bit. And one of the last slides in this lecture will be potential things that we can use in pre-warm-up, which are not used that often because maybe they seem to be a little bit intense. So potentiation as part of regular warm-up, of course, very important, but potentiation as part of pre-warm-up is something that definitely should be considered in future, and I suggest all of you to think about it and maybe to find new ways to implement this into your pre-warm-up, not only warm-up, because I know you already think about this in the warm-up, but in pre-warm-up, maybe that's something to consider. What about chronic effects? We talked about acute effects, that pre-warm-up is going to help you to perform better in that training session, because you will have optimal range of motion or better range of motion, and you will have optimal stability to perform something in the main part of football training session. But if you add all of those minutes, you get a big number in one season. So if you only do it 4 times per week for 15 minutes in one season, it adds up to 44 plus hours of what? Now listen to this. Individual, performance-oriented sessions. Perfect. Individual and oriented for performance, both acute and chronic. It sounds excellent, and it's a lot of hours. Because, of course, especially on top level, but also in youth football, it's not easy to find time to work. This is one of the most simple ways to find time to have additional work. Not only this, I will talk about some other things, how to find additional time to work. So this is simple time, simple way to find 15 minutes 4 times per week and add up to 44 plus hours. I will give you another example. Again, national team Croatia, in 52 days, we had 39 team training sessions, but we also had 30 individual morning sessions. So this is separate training session, separate part of the day. We had 30 of those individual ones. I have to tell you, not all players came to all of them. This is a very important part of your work, how to communicate with which player, how to sometimes respect their own individual habits, and how to maybe intentionally let them stay in the room and not come to that individual session. This requires good communication, so your job, in my opinion, it has to be good combination of evidence-based knowledge, of practical knowledge, and of communication skills. It's a very important thing, especially on top level, to gain trust and to create environment which is positive and optimistic, and then there is a good chance for creating something serious. You all know the connection between good VO2 max and performance on the pitch, and this is something that's very important. But sometimes we forget that capillarization is also very important and has high connection to performance on the pitch. This slide shows relationship between aerobic capacity at 2 millimoles and high intensity running during the game. And the connection is incredible. Connection is great. In my experience with different types of players, usually those players who have great 2 millimole threshold are also the players who can repeat high intensity activities in the game. Also, what I found out in contacts with those players is something interesting. They all, when they were kids, they all lived in the way that they have a lot of capillarization training accidentally, because usually they had to walk or jog or ride bicycle to the training session and back. So when they were going to the training session for 5, 6, 7 kilometers, they did capillarization. When they were coming back, maybe they did some kind of extensive aerobic running or activity. But it was accidental, but it was definitely beneficial. And communicating with them, all of those who have incredible 2 millimole thresholds, usually between ages of 10 and 15, often did exactly that. So maybe this is something to consider in future work of certain academies, in future setting up the systems of physical conditioning training for youth football players.